One aspect that I love about Vanguard is the fact that its lore is just fun to read, and at the same time it kind of encompasses into the card gameplay itself. If comparing Vanguard to a type of game, then I would say its lore is like a open world RPG, while Yu-Gi-Oh is kind of like FGO events, where like the event is kind of encompassed within its own story, doesn't really affect heavily with the actual main story in any way or another. The very interesting thing about the Overdressed lore is that it takes place 3000 years after the original event of the Planet Crey, which kinda coincides with the G era lore, where many of the strike units came from roughly 3000 years in the future. This makes some very interesting conjunction between the Overdressed format and the past format, both in the lore-wise and the gameplay-wise, especially with the encounter cards. So before I go any further, a huge disclaimer here, as I'll be mentioning some topics that might upset some people. So I'll just leave this disclaimer beforehand, just in case anyone feel upset about what I'll be talking about later on. Otherwise, I have nothing against any of the things that we mentioned today, but it's just that it does parallel with the lore of the Overdressed Crey story itself. Also, I'm making Vanguard content semi-regularly, just try to push it as often as I can. So if you enjoy this kind of content, consider subscribe and ring that bell to my channel to keep up with all the notifications. And of course, leave a like and share, just to boost the algorithm. And without further ado, let's get into the video. Just to recap what encounter cards are, they are essentially the unit from the past, aka retrained in the D formats. This unit kind of left a huge mark in the era, and they kind of influenced in one way or another some of the clans or like some of the archetypes we see in the current version of D formats. Some examples of this include Divine Sister as a very obvious reference to Battle Sister, Blaze Maiden, which is kind of the mix of between a Dragon Dancer from Narukami and Kagero. There is a lot more reference I can talk about with these kind of influences, but for now let's focus on what is related to the two right line of the encounter cards, Phantom Blaster Dragon and Dragonic Overlord. The first implementation is that we might be seeing what we saw before as a strike unit as a new version, as kind of like a retrain, like what we see with the upcoming BTO4 to these two units. The example for these are of course DS, the Purge, and Phantom Blaster Diablo. And I'm not surprised because of the fact that these units are essentially more or less 3000 years into the future of these units. So that's make me wonder what happened to Phantom Blaster Dragon and of course Overlords over 3000 years. How much they changed over time and how much influence they still have over their nation that they reside in. As much as I wish to see new forms of Dragonic Overlord and PBD over the time, just for the collection, but I think the more interesting part to this particular theory is with the unit that is supporting the right line, especially Blaster right lines. So for the Dragonic Empire lover, I'm sorry, there's not much to talk about Dragonic Empire aside from the fact that they didn't really change much over the 3000 years. So what's the deal with Blaster, or more specifically Cater Sanctuary? First, for one, you must understand that human can change over the long period of time, especially it's 3000 years after the original event of Vanguard. And the most important key about the change in United Sanctuary is that they lost a huge amount of land area on the planet itself, so they decided to go upward into the sky and essentially created what I would call a caste system. So many of you might ask, what exactly is going on? Well, the answer is actually in the name of the nation itself, Cater Sanctuary. Cater in Hebrew actually means crown, as in the thing that you wear on the head. So that actually changed a lot of the meaning behind the word sanctuary of the nation, from the sanctuary of the unity, aka equality, to the sanctuary of the crown, aka royalty. A very good example of this relies on two of the other right lines, Bastion and Hexa-Orb. Hexa-Orb actually belongs to the lower tier of the Cater, where they are more focused on the fortune and everything, while Bastion is essentially a douchebag knight order. Like literally the law just say he looked down on the lower tier of the Keter Sanctuary. And that leaves a question, what happened to the blasters? So for context here, blasters are essentially a series of weapons held by a selected number of knights, and they essentially inherit the names of the weapon itself. That's why if you see a lot of blaster cards, many of them doesn't have a name. And Blaster is supposed to be the epitome of Royal Paladin Knights. They need to be kind, they need to be strong, they need to be honest. Essentially everything that you need from a good knight virtue. Okay, so this is MacMegane post recording here. I just noticed that like there was a mistake that I mentioned in the Blaster description. So essentially Blaster used to be a corrupted weapon made by Dark Dictator, but eventually got researched on by some of the post-corrupted user that eventually got uncorrupted and became essentially what we know as the new blaster weapon. But it doesn't change the fact that it's still a very privileged weapon given to a specific group of people only. But I think the fact that when I mentioned about the Royal Paladin thingy is actually false. So I apologize for that. But if you see what happened to Keter Sanctuary now, will those values still stay, especially if you became a royalty? And I think there is one of the two scenarios that could happen. One is that blaster weapon became essentially an ancient technology I mean. So that means that these weapons are no longer used for battle but used to build more weapons, essentially just make more arsenals for the current generation of the knights. Or there is still blaster units still around, but they are no longer very white or black completely. And yes, I'm talking about the moral compass here. There is a possibility that blaster currently are completely corrupted. Or the blaster, they might have like a side between the corrupted side, like the one that hungry for power, and the normal side, which still kind of has the value and everything. And now that you have considered everything, the fact that Blaster Dark is actually the first right line to be introduced as an encounter card for Keter actually makes more sense, even though there is Blaster Blade, which is a lot more iconic, his Blaster Blade is the OG avatar of the Vanguard. And after the fact that you're considering that the Keter Sanctuary is more or less very different from how the United Sanctuary was, it's actually very interesting to see how new owner of the blasters gonna look like and how they will act. And to be honest, same goes for the Overlord as well. And I think just any encounter card that will be released later on, as the fact retains that there's a lot of things changed over the past 3,000 years in the entire planet of Krayt. And there are things that's gonna affect how each of the unit will be looked upon by essentially their descendants or the successors, whatever it is. And yeah, overall I think it is gonna be very interesting to see how each of these laws will be affecting how the card design will look like. And that is all I have for today, guys. Leave in the comments below on what you guys think of this kind of videos. I have been trying to just branch out a bit from gameplay video to different kind of aspect of Vanguard, and lore is one thing that immediately hit my mind once I see the support from the blaster that came out few days ago based on the day I recorded this. And yeah, I think in general it's gonna be quite interesting to look into the laws sometimes, not all the time of course. And that's all I have for today. Take care of yourself, and this is MacMegane signing out.